Good morning, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and start now. So my name is Cailey Stevens, and I am a trade analyst with the Trade and Market Intelligence section of the International Trade Center in Geneva. And today's session will cover how you can use ITC's market analysis tools to navigate trade uncertainty with a focus on the recently implemented tariffs in the US. As my colleague Sam mentioned, this session will be recorded and we will share it with you after the presentation. During my presentation, I will not be taking questions. If you have specific questions about your country or product, please email us at marketanalysis@intrasyn.org, and that email will be shown later on, so you don't have to write it down right now. Today, I'm going to cover 4 tools. We'll begin with Trade Map, so you can see how exposed a country and a particular product is to the US market. Next, we will move to Market Access Map, so you can see how the tariffs faced by that country for that product have changed in the US market. Then we will move on to the Trade Briefs, which provide analysis of recent changes in tariffs. And then we will end with the Export Potential Map, which allows users to identify alternative markets for a country and a particular product. And it will show you markets with potential within the next 5 years. So today I'm going to use an example of fans exported by Vietnam to the US, but we will also see some examples for vanilla from Madagascar and car exports from Japan. And again, if you don't see your particular product or country represented in this presentation today, and you still feel like you need some help understanding the tariffs that they face, please email us. We are happy to help you navigate these uncertain times. So as you know, we live in a rapidly changing tariff landscape. Since January 2025, there have been 50 new trade measures announced. And as of April 7th, there were about 35 active trade members, so trade measures that were actively forced. And there are new measures being constantly announced. As you may know, last Wednesday, the US government announced sweeping tariffs on countries. So most countries will be covered by an additional 10% tariff when they enter the US market. But they also announced higher reciprocal tariffs that will apply to countries with which the US has the largest trade deficits. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. So tariffs are becoming more complex. And these are just 3 examples of how tariffs have changed and how they are getting more complex in the US market. These are examples for exports of fans from Vietnam to the US, exports of vanilla from Madagascar to the US, and exports of wool sweaters from China to the US. So just to give you an example, so fans from Vietnam. So these are fans that are often used in cars to cool down motors. Prior to March 12th, these fans faced a most favored nation tariff in the US of 2.3%. After March 12th, these fans are now subject to additional tariffs on derivative aluminum products. So they are subject to a 25% tariff on the aluminum content in the fan. So the final tariff that the fans will face in the US market from Vietnam is about 27.3%. And it's not exactly 27.3% because that 25% additional tariff on aluminum derivative products is only being assessed on the aluminum content of the fan. If we take another example of vanilla from Madagascar, prior to April 9th, this product faced an MFN tariff of 0% in the US market. But tomorrow, starting tomorrow, when vanilla from Madagascar enters the US, they will face a 47% reciprocal tariff. So this product is now going to face a final tariff of 47% in the US market. Now, if we look at wool sweaters from China, they originally faced an MFN tariff of 16%. On February 1st, the US government implemented a 10% additional tariff on China that was then topped up by another 10% additional tariff on March 4th. And on April 2nd, there's a 25% additional tariff that is applied to countries that import oil from Venezuela, and China imports oil from Venezuela. And then starting tomorrow, the reciprocal tariff on China is an additional 34%. So when we look at the effective applied tariff to this product in the US market, starting tomorrow, it's actually going to be 95%. Now, this information comes from ITC's market access map, and we will see that tool a little bit later. But again, if you'd like some help understanding how this new regime will apply to your product, please contact us. Now, tariffs are becoming more complex, and many countries are facing these complex tariffs, especially since last Wednesday, which is when the US government announced these additional tariffs that hit most countries. So this is a chart of the countries that are facing these high reciprocal tariffs. Now, these countries are the countries with which the US has the largest trade deficit. So that means the US is importing more from these countries than it is exporting to those countries. How the US government calculated these reciprocal tariffs is that they did it in the following way. So they took the US trade deficit with that country, and then they divided it by US imports from that country. Then they multiplied it by 0.5 to get the reciprocal tariff. Now, this is not the tariff that these countries apply on US goods when US goods enter their market. If you look at the little orange diamond, that shows you what the effectively applied tariffs in these countries are. Now, importantly, the countries that are going to be hit with the highest tariffs in the US market are least developed countries. So we have Lesotho, Cambodia, Laos, Madagascar, we have earthquake hit Myanmar. And so the US is really penalizing the countries with which it has the largest trade deficits, and those countries are often least developed countries and developing countries. And then importantly, these tariffs will go into effect tomorrow. Here you have a link to the list of countries covered by the reciprocal tariffs, but we will see that again when we move to market access map. Now today, I am going to use 4 tools, as I mentioned in the beginning. I'm going to start with Trade Map that has information on trade flows and company data. I'm then going to move to Market Access Map that has information on market access conditions, including tariffs, trade remedies, and non-tariff measures. Then I will move to Trade Briefs, which provides an analysis of these recent measures. And I will end with the Export Potential Map, which helps identify new markets. Now, I want to mention that our tools, so Trade Map in particular, Trade Map is free for users in developing countries and the EU. And Market Access Map, Trade Briefs, and Export Potential are free for all users, regardless of where you are based. And these are not the only tools that we have at ITC. If you visit our Market Analysis Tools portal at marketanalysis.interestin.org, you can see all our other tools, which include tools on rules of origin, on tenders, procurement, and on investment. So please have a look there. I want to mention that trade map is currently being redesigned, and the new design will be launched at the end of this year in December 2025. And we have a new design for export potential map, which should be released in May of this year. So now we are going to move to a demo of the tools, and we are going to look at how the steel and aluminum tariffs affect exports of fans from Vietnam to the US. All right. I'm just going to take a moment to make sure that you can see my screen. All right. So I'm going to start now with the demonstration of trade map. So trade map, as I mentioned, has data on imports and exports for goods and services. And it can be used to see, for example, who are the largest suppliers of a particular product to a particular market and how exposed a country is for a particular product in a particular market. So let's take the example of fans. And it looks like I just have to log in here. Let's see. Here we go. Oh. I'm going to stop screen sharing for one moment while I sort this out. I'm just logging in so I can see the data. So this is a good moment to mention that, like I said, that certain aspects of certain data in TradeMap is only, the full set of data is visible in TradeMap in the EU and developing countries for free. If you are located in a developed country, we have a fee that you have to pay to see a certain level of detail for products. So that's why I had to log in just then. So we're going to look for fans, and we're going to look at the United States of America. Oh. Okay. So we are looking at the USA's imports of fans. So we are going to now click Trade Indicators. And this table is going to show us the largest suppliers of fans to the US market. So what we can see here is that in 2023, China exported $573 million worth of fans to the US market, followed by Mexico, Germany, and Vietnam. We can see that fans from Vietnam accounted for 10.6% of the US's total imports of fans. And we can also see that between 2019 and 2023, US imports of fans from all suppliers grew by 10%. And when we look at Vietnam, we can see that US imports of fans from Vietnam over this period grew 38%. So Vietnam has become an increasingly important supplier of fans to the US market. Now, we have just seen who are the largest suppliers of fans to the US. Now we can look at how important the US market is for Vietnam specifically. So we are going to click on Vietnam. And I am going to select mirror data. So this is data reported by Vietnam's trading partners. As we scroll down, we see that the United States is Vietnam's most important market for fans. And in 2023, the US accounted for 34.7% of Vietnam's total exports of fans. So Vietnam is very exposed to the US market for this product. Now, prior to March 12th, this product faced a 2.3% MFN tariff in the US market, like we saw in that chart in the beginning. But after March 12th, this product is now subject to an additional 25% tariff that's assessed on the aluminum content of the product. And we are now going to move to market access map so we can see how the tariffs applied to this product in the US market have changed. So I'm going to move to market access map, and we are going to click on monitor measures. Now we will get back to our example in 1 minute, but I just want to tell you about this monitor measures page. So this page is where you will find up-to-date information about the most recently announced tariffs. So you can see the latest updates, you can see an overview of the measures in an interactive map, and you can see a detailed list of measures, which I will show you now. So under the latest updates, you can see the tariffs that have been recently announced. So these are tariffs, these are information that we have on announcements as of April 4th. And we have a whole team that are constantly monitoring new trade measures, and we update this page frequently. So even though we have sort of information that about tariffs that were announced as of April 4th, some of these tariffs have not yet come into effect, which we will see a little bit later down the page. So as you will see, we have these US tariffs that were announced last Wednesday. We have China's retaliatory measures as well. And as we were mentioning earlier, you have this 10% baseline tariff that applies to most countries effective April 5th. And then you have this country-specific reciprocal tariff, which will start applying tomorrow. So these are higher tariffs that are applied to countries with which the US has the largest trade deficits. And if you want to see a list of those countries and the tariffs that apply, you can click on Annex 1 here, and it will pop up here. So we can see, for example, Vietnam is going to face a 46% additional tariff starting tomorrow. Now, you may say, okay, so I'm using Vietnam as an example. I've been telling you that fans from Vietnam are going to now be subject to this 25% additional tariff on the aluminum content. But I also just showed you that Vietnam will be subject to a 46% additional tariff starting tomorrow. So how do we make sense of that? Well, we have an explanation here that exemptions to these country-specific reciprocal tariff include sort of items already subject to Section 232 tariffs, including steel, aluminum, autos, and auto parts. So this additional 25% tariff that's assessed on the aluminum content of fans, it is considered a Section 232 tariff. And so that 25% tariff will apply to the aluminum content of fans, but this 46% tariff on Vietnam will not go on top of that 25%, because tariffs under Section 232 are exempt from that reciprocal tariff. And you can read the text here to understand the other exemptions. So we are now going to scroll down. And we also have information on trade measures that were implemented in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And as we scroll down, we have this interactive map where you can look at import measures or export measures. And then the legend here also tells us if those measures are restrictive, if those measures are liberalizing, if the country has implemented both restrictive and liberalizing measures, or no measures at all. And if we hover over the US, we can see that the US has implemented 27 temporary import measures that are restrictive. Now we're going to continue to scroll down. And here we are looking at a detailed list of measures. We are looking at measures related to recent geopolitical tensions, but you could also look at measures related to the Russian invasion of Ukraine or measures related to COVID-19. So here we have information on the country that has enacted the measure, the partners that that measure affects, the type of measure, the direction of trade, whether it impacts imports or exports, the products that are affected, a description of the measure, just a short description, the measure's effect on trade, the status of the measure, whether it has been announced, whether it is active, whether it is terminated, or whether it is an investigation, the start date of the measure, the end date if it is known, and the source document. So I am going to sort by enacting country, and we are going to scroll down. And here you have this measure that was announced last Wednesday, which applies that 10% additional tariff on most countries, and then these higher reciprocal tariffs on countries with which the US has the largest trade deficits. And you have the document where you can see where that information is coming from. And importantly, we can see that these 10% tariffs for all countries were effective April 5th, and that these reciprocal tariffs will start applying tomorrow on April 9th, and that exceptions to these tariffs include items already subject to Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum. So that's going to cover those fans from Vietnam's, autos and auto parts. That's going to cover car imports from Japan. Now, we want to return to our example of fan imports from Vietnam. And if you want the underlying document that covers the Section 232 tariffs on aluminum and derivative products, we're going to continue to scroll down. And you see here is that measure that affects aluminum articles and derivative aluminum products. You can click here for the underlying document to see what other products are covered by that measure. Now we're going to look specifically at fans from Vietnam. I have another window here of market access map. We were just in the monitor measures page, and we are now on the home page. So we are going to look at Vietnam as the exporting country. We're going to look at the United States of America as the destination country, and we are going to look at our particular product. So now to use market access map, but also to export or import, it is very important that you know the national tariff line code that applies to your product in your destination market. So when we click search, we're going to see that we have to choose the national tariff line code that applies to this product in the US market. So we're going to click on other fans. And as we scroll down, we see the customs tariff, the MFN tariff that applies to this product. So prior to March 12th, a 2.3% duty applied to this product in the US market. And we can see that there are trade remedies on this product, which we'll go to in a moment. And then you also have regulatory requirements, which I will show you as well. So these are non-tariff measures that the product faces in the US market. So when we click on trade remedies, we see there is a trade remedy, and it is that 25% additional tariff on the aluminum content of this product. And again, you can get the underlying document here. So that's good. So now this product faces the 2.3% plus the additional 25% on the aluminum content of the product. And we are working as fast as we can to sort of update this section of Market Access Map. So the Monitor Measures page is going to have the most recent information. And because there are so many tariffs going into effect, this specific view for a particular country and a particular product, we are updating it as fast as we can. So you may use it for some products and not see those additional tariffs there yet, but they are coming. So please know that that will be updated as soon as possible. But if you have questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. And as we scroll down, as I mentioned, you have all the regulatory requirements. These are non-tariff measures that this product has to comply with when it enters into the US market. Now, what does this mean for trade? We are going to move to the trade briefs. So this is a monthly series that we do where we analyze recent trade trends. And in particular, right now, we are looking at the effect of the US government's recently announced tariffs. So we are going to click on our series. And here we have a description of what we are doing in this series and what we are looking at specifically in this issue. And so as we scroll down, what we have is a scatter plot that shows how particular sectors in this case, or particular countries in the case of steel and aluminum and vehicles and parts, are exposed to the US market. So here we are looking at the additional tariffs on steel and aluminum. And as we scroll down, we can see on the horizontal axis, we can see the share of the US market in a country's steel and aluminum exports. So how important the US market is for a country's exports in the steel and aluminum sector. And then on the vertical axis, we can see the share of the steel and aluminum sector in a country's total exports. So how important steel and aluminum are for a country. And the size of the circle represents the relevance to the US. So let's look at Vietnam, for example. What we can see here is that steel and aluminum accounts for 18% of Vietnam's total exports. So it is an important sector for Vietnam. We can also see that 13% of Vietnam's steel and aluminum exports are destined to the US market. So the US market is an important market for Vietnam. And we can see that the size of the circle represents the fact that steel and aluminum from Vietnam account for 3% of the US's total imports of steel and aluminum. Now, we could take another example of tariffs on vehicles and parts. So this is another Section 232 action that applies 25% tariff on cars and car parts. And we can look at Japan. So what we see here is that cars and car parts account for 20% of Japan's total exports. So it is an important sector for Japan. We can also see that 31% of Japan's exports of cars and car parts are destined to the US market. So the US is an important market for Japan. And we can also see that 15% of the US's imports of cars and car parts come from Japan. So Japan is also an important supplier to the US. Now, as I mentioned before, um, because these tariffs on cars and car parts were implemented under Section 232, they are exempt from the additional tariff that will apply on top of Japan. So you will just have this 25% tariff being applied to cars from Japan. You won't then have the additional reciprocal tariff for Japan on top of that. Now, what do these tariffs mean for these countries? How are they impacting them in the next 5 years? So as we scroll down, we have a simulation of these tariffs' impact on export potential. Now we're going to look at tariffs on steel and aluminum, and we're going to look at Vietnam. So what this means is that the US's tariffs on steel and aluminum are projected by our model to reduce Vietnam's export potential in the US market in the steel and aluminum sector by $7.4 billion by 2029. And if we look at tariffs on vehicles and parts and hover over Japan, we can see that the tariffs on cars and car parts in the US market is likely to reduce Japan's export potential for cars and car parts in the US market by $17 billion by 2029. Now, you may ask, how are we projecting this? How are we estimating that this will be the loss to Vietnam or the loss to Japan? Now, this model is based on our export potential map, which I will show in a minute. But what it does is our export potential estimates are based on supply, demand, and what we call ease of trade between two countries. They also take account of tariffs. So in this case specifically, we are using a partial equilibrium model that models the effect of the change in these tariffs. So we look at what export potential would have been in the US market in the absence of these tariffs, and then we look at what export potential would have been in the US market in the presence of these tariffs. So that change in tariffs in the US market is leading to a $17 billion loss for Japan and the US market in the cars and parts sector by 2029. And for Vietnam, in the case of steel and aluminum, it's leading to a loss of about $7.4 billion in the steel and aluminum sector in the US market by 2029. Now, I am going to move to the export potential map because given these losses, you may say, okay, how can I find alternative markets, other markets than the US, markets where I can sort of regain this lost export potential? So now we are in the export potential map. And we are going to start on the Markets tab. We are going to first look at Vietnam, and we are going to look at this product, the fans. Okay, so what we see in export potential map, we are looking at the exporter Vietnam for this product fans, and we are seeing the countries that have the highest export potential for this product from Vietnam. Right now, we are looking at the countries with the highest export potential, but we can also sort by potential to actual exports gap, which actually shows us the markets that have the most room for growth by 2029. And we see that China is the market with the most room for growth for this product by 2029, and they have unrealized potential of $123 million. So this means that by 2029, Vietnam should be able to export $123 million more of fans to China than they are currently exporting. Other markets that have unrealized potential for this product include the Republic of Korea and India. Now I'm going to take the example of Madagascar, and we're looking at vanilla. And we are looking at the countries with the most room for growth by 2029. And we can see that the US has the most room for growth for vanilla by 2029, but let's say we don't want to export to the US because we are going to be facing that 47% tariff on vanilla. And instead, we could focus on France or Germany or Canada to increase exports of vanilla from Madagascar. So, for example, the French market has $89 million in unrealized potential for vanilla from Madagascar. So that means that we expect Madagascar to be able to export $89 million more dollars worth of vanilla to France by 2029. Now, again, let's perhaps look at Japan. So we're going to go to the products tab. We're going to look at Japan. And we are going to look at subsectors. So we're going to move to gap chart. So we see motor vehicles and parts. And we want to find markets with export potential for this sector. So previously, in the case of Vietnam and Madagascar, we were looking at a particular product, but now we are looking at a subsector, which is the cars and parts subsector. So now we are looking at the markets with the highest export potential for cars and parts from Japan. We are going to sort by potential to actual exports gaps, which show us the countries with the most room for growth. So if you remember, I mentioned in the trade briefs, we showed that Japan is likely to have a $17 billion loss in the US market. And I will talk about the US in a minute, but if they wanted to make up that lost export potential in other markets, they could export to China, Germany, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. And if they were to realize their export potential in those markets, they could actually make up that $17 billion loss in the US market. So in China, for example, we have $6.9 billion of unrealized potential. Germany has 4.1, the Philippines has 2.5, Thailand has 2.2, and Vietnam has 2.2. And now you may say, you just showed us trade briefs and you're showing us this loss in the US market. Why is it that now we're looking at export potential map and you show me that Japan has export potential in the US market? Now, in the trade briefs, we have this partial equilibrium model, as I was mentioning, that models the effect of the change in tariffs. So what export potential would be in the absence of those tariffs and what export potential would be in the presence of those tariffs. So what is shown in export potential map currently is what export potential would be in the absence of those tariffs. So in the US market, what we are using to calculate export potential is the tariff that would apply to Japanese motor vehicles and parts prior to the implementation of these trade remedies. So in export potential map, trade remedies such as this 25% additional tariff on vehicles and parts are considered a source of unrealized potential. What this means for you is just that when you are using export potential map, you can use it to find alternative markets to the US. So if you see the US in there, just understand that the projections for export potential in the US are not taking account of these trade remedies, of these recently enacted tariffs that are considered trade remedies, but focus on the other markets with unrealized potential. So just to go back to, for example, the example of Japan. So, we're exporting cars from Japan. We want to focus on other markets. We want to focus on Germany, for example. And we know we have the potential to export $4.1 billion more of cars to Germany by 2029. So what is causing this unrealized potential in the Japanese market? So unrealized potential is driven by two things. So it's driven by dynamic factors such as growth in GDP and population, so because we look at GDP per capita, and it's also driven by static frictions such as non-tariff measures, and in the case of the US, trade remedies. So in order to tap into potential that is growth driven, that just means that that potential is going to sort of occur naturally between now and 2029 because as growth occurs, so as GDP grows, as the population grows, so we just need to make sure that we are investing in the capacity to meet additional demand that will be in the German market. And if we want to tap into the unrealized potential that is generated by current trade frictions, we need to identify, the non-tariff factors that are impacting exports of cars from Japan to Germany. So this means that you need to be talking to the companies to understand what types of barriers they are facing in the German market. So this could be non-tariff measures. This could also be difficulty finding buyers. So it's really important to talk with the companies to understand what issues they are facing. Now, I'm going to switch back to my presentation. And just to do a recap of what we have been covering in this session, we started with trade map to identify a country's exposure to the US market, but also how important that supplier was in the US. We then transitioned to market access map to understand how the US tariffs facing that country and product have changed. We then went into the trade briefs to visualize the potential trade impact of these recent tariffs. And then we finished with export potential map to identify alternative markets with potential. Now that brings me to the end of my presentation. And if you have a question that was not covered today, please contact us here at Market Analysis at intrasend.org. We are more than happy to help you understand how these tariffs are affecting your country. We also want to mention that we offer sort of customized solutions for a fee, including API and bulk data and analysis for a given region or a country, more in-depth analysis, and we also offer capacity building. So all these tools that I covered here, as well as the other tools that we have, we can offer capacity building um, on those tools. And please follow us on our social media, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and we have many trainings available on YouTube. And I just want to mention finally that all our tools are co-funded by the European Union as well as donors to the ITC Trust Fund, which you see here. And I would like to thank you so much for your attendance today. And as I said at the beginning, we will be sharing this recording with you after the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you have a wonderful day.